Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today with the IWRA webinar, Wicked Problems of Water Quality Governance. We're going to give all the late runners like myself just an extra second to join us. And if this is an opportunity for you to grab a quick, I guess, a glass of water or a cup of coffee if you're joining us from the North America, South America, the Americas, whatever drink is good for you at this hour. Go ahead and go ahead and take the time to get that, and we'll be starting here in just about 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay, everyone, it's 3 minutes past the hour, so I think we're going to go ahead and get this webinar started. Hopefully, hopefully everything goes well. We're having some small technical hiccups, but I think it's going to be fine. Welcome to the International Water Resources Association webinar, The Wicked Problems of Water Quality Governance. Very appropriate title for this Halloween day. Our panelists today include Mrs. Heather Bond, the Project Officer at the International Water Resources Association, Mrs. Birgitta Lymer, who's Director of Water Governance at Stockholm International Water Institute, Dr. Anna Robak, Research Manager at Innovation and Future Ready, WSP Canada, and Dr. Yuliya the Biology Center at the Czech Academy of Sciences in the Czech Republic. And if he joins us, if he's able to connect, then it'll be Professor Henning Bjornlund, Professor of Water Policy and Management, University of South Australia, and a long-time IWRA board member. This is a webinar, as most of you probably know, that's hosted by the International Water Resources Association. The IWRA is an international network of researchers and practitioners who work on a multidisciplinary range of water resource issues. It's a nonprofit, non-governmental, and educational organization. We provide knowledge-based forum for bridging disciplines and geographies by connecting professionals, students, individuals, corporations, institutions, really everyone, all the different levels, people who are concerned about the sustainable use of the world's water resources. So we're really happy to have you here today, and thank you for tuning in, coming and joining us. And we have a great panel of both practitioners and researchers, which is a good mix, I think, not just having academics, but with people who also have their hands deeply in the field. So some people who can give us a theoretical overview, and some people who have much experience, years of experience. So many of you know that this is a webinar based on the special issue of our flagship publication, Water International. This is a journal that IWRA puts out and is offered free to all of our members, but also probably through your local academic research institution, university, and such. So this issue will be shared with you open access, thanks to our very generous publisher, Taylor and Francis. So in the follow-up information, we should be sending you a link with that information so that you can read all the articles and hopefully cite them all as much as you can in all of your future publications. Everyone would like that. Everyone likes a citation. So I think, as you know today, that everyone on our panel is coming at this from different angles. We all know that there's problems with water quality. And that's an issue that has often kind of gone a little bit under the radar, as opposed to water quantity. People talk about droughts, but they don't talk about the pollution. People talk about, floods, but they forget to talk about, if the drinking water is safe as much as it is accessible. So people are coming from a lot of different angles, and in particular, this touches on a lot of interdisciplinary issues. we're bringing together chemists, we're bringing together biologists, we're bringing together governance and policymakers, lawyers. So there's a lot of trouble in sort of understanding how to address issues of water quality. And so this kind of presents these wicked problems, complicated public policy issues that are hard and intractable to address. So we are going to have our speakers present their research and discuss these issues, and it'll be open to questions at the end. So also to remind you, at the end, you can take this discussion, and we'll be having it on our LinkedIn page afterwards. Henning has joined us. Excellent, Henning. Glad to see you're with us. Why don't you got a little cord there hanging out there. Why don't you kind of move that, if you could, sir? There you go. Awesome. So, okay, if you want to follow up with us on our LinkedIn webpage after this event, go ahead and do so. It'll be great. We'll continue the discussion. For anyone who's just joining us for the first time, I'm going to go over the quick format. If you've already joined us before, it's the same format. Each of our panelists will give a short presentation, and at the end of all of this, we'll have audience questions from you. So you can go ahead and type the questions. You'll see it's on your GoToPanel control panel. It's about halfway down. It says questions. If you go and type that, I'll see it, and then I can relay it to our panelists. Please try to keep your questions broad and engaging. If you have a small detail question about a slide or something like that, or a fact or figure that you hear, go ahead and reach out to our panelists. They're extremely friendly people. They'll respond to you probably. So just go ahead and send a quick email and just say, hey, I was wondering if I could follow up with you about this. They love that. I'm sure they would. Everyone likes to know their work's being engaged with and appreciated. At the end, we will also post a recording of this and the PDFs on our website. So www.iwra.org. You can go ahead there, and we'll have the PDFs and everything available. So you can follow up and engage and cite these articles. With that in mind, I'm going to try to turn the floor over to Henning. And Henning, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
Yes, I can hear you indeed. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Excellent. Wonderful.
I'm sorry, I had a little, it's very, very late here in the evening and I fell asleep.
Oh, I understand. It's good we called. Excellent. Do you have your PowerPoint ready?
I do, but now I don't know what to do.
Okay, I'm gonna click here. I'm gonna share your screen. It's gonna ask you if you accept to share that. Go ahead and make your PowerPoint fill the whole screen, just like you would do at a presentation.
I have my PowerPoint open, but I don't know what to do.
If it fills the whole screen.
My screen.
Yeah,
okay.
Go ahead and click this. Let's give it 1 second there. There we go. Go ahead and make it fill the whole screen there, like a presentation mode, you know.
Like that?
No, down there at the bottom. Nope. You want to come over here to at the bottom of your screen there. Close, real close. No, I think this is presenter mode, as they call it. I think you want presentation mode.
I'm in presentation mode. Yes.
Well, we see all your notes and everything, so that's.
You do.
Yeah, we do.
There's no.
It's not the worst. But it's not ideal. Go ahead. Maybe can you? Do you have two monitors?
I have my laptop, which is the one that have my camera on it, and then I have a
okay, but you're
screen.
not using two monitors at the same time. Or do you have an external monitor hooked up to your laptop as well?
An external monitor as well, yes. Should I disconnect my external monitor?
No, you know what I think we should do? If we had more time, I would say let's go ahead and spend a while troubleshooting this. But since we have a limited time for our webinar, let's go ahead. I mean, this is not the worst situation in the world. I don't think you have a lot of notes or anything too strange in there. So let's go ahead and just have you give you the presentation, and then we can.
Can you see my slide?
Yeah, we can see the slides.
Okay.
It looks good.
So okay, so I can just go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott, and welcome to the webinar. I'm very sorry about my late arrival, but it's kind of late in the evening, and I fell asleep. So here we are, and I'm the chair of the IWRA Science, Technology, and Publication Committee, and we have had the pleasure of hosting this theme of water quality and wicked problems. And we had a special issue published very recently, and some of the authors from that special issue will be presenting their papers here this evening. So I will be talking a little bit about one wicked issue that one of our members presented in the special issue, and that's the issue about how to best possibly benefit from the many different types of water quality that we have available to meet water scarcity. The reality is that we have very big problems today in meeting demand, and we have basically over-extracted our existing resources, and we have very big problems meeting current demand. And we are in a position where we have to basically reduce further extraction of our consumptive uses because not only because water quality in our water sources is very pure. So there's no way that we can meet future demand, but basically by business as usual. We have to find new and better ways of meeting future demand. So therefore, one of the ways of doing that is to make better use of all the different types of water quality we have. Find the best possible ways of benefiting from the different water qualities we have. So we have, I'm trying to illustrate that in this diagram here. So in the middle here, we have a number of different water users: domestic, industrial, agricultural, mining, and other urban users. So we have a number of different water sources and qualities at our disposal to try to do that. We have groundwater sources, surface water, rainwater, different types of wastewater. We have treated wastewater. We have desalinated water. We have recycled water. And the question is to get the different users to actually use these different water qualities in such a way that is most possible beneficial. So how can we do that? So we have a number of different tools and processes to our disposal to achieve that. So we can introduce different policies. We can introduce planning systems to get people to do the right thing. We have science and better technologies. We have learning processes, training and information. We have economic instrument to try to get people to use the different water uses to their most beneficial use. So we can reduce the dependence on new freshwater resources. So the different sectors, water using sectors, have different potentials. So one of the potentially most beneficial sectors to benefit from different water uses is agriculture. Agriculture accounts for 70% of all water use. So if you have to meet new demand, agriculture is one of the most potential sources to meet new demand if there is no more new supply. So reallocation of water from agriculture is one of the best ways, most possible ways of meeting new demand for freshwater resources. But on the other hand, we do not want to reduce agricultural production because it's very important for food security and meeting a human need for food. So if we can get agriculture to use different types of water qualities, we can release other freshwater resources and allocate other freshwater resources for other uses. For instance, where I live in Adelaide in South Australia, we have two major water treatment plants, and they are at the moment having a separate water supply infrastructure into big vineyards around Adelaide and into vegetable producing areas. So that have increased agricultural production while potentially releasing freshwater resources for other uses. We have domestic users that can potentially use different alternative sources of water. For instance, in Hong Kong, 8 in 10 households is now supplied with seawater for toilet flushing. Also, rainwater harvesting has significant potential. Industrial users have significant potential. In Singapore, 40% of water demand at the moment is met by recycled use, mainly industrial users. Similarly, the energy sector has significant potential to use water of different quality at different stages of production. So each of the different water using sectors has very great potentials to reuse water in different ways to meet their demand, and therefore releasing the available new freshwater resources to other users that need water of a better quality. But there are problems in achieving that. There are a lot of risks and uncertainties that are impacting human health. In agriculture, in reality, in many developing countries today, recycled water is being used, wastewater is being used for agriculture, and there is no regulations. There's no system. There is no there's no definition of what quality this kind of water should have in order to be used for agricultural purposes. So there is a number of risks associated. There's also a lot of cost. A lot of developed countries, of course, have the financial ability to do this. For instance, the example I gave before about Adelaide, we now have a doubled supply infrastructure, purple lines. That means that everybody knows that the water that comes here is for irrigation only. Similar, all the water that are used for irrigating parks and other things is supplied by several infrastructure. So there is significant cost associated with it, but on the other hand, there's also significant savings in treatment of the water. But we really need guidelines to establish what the appropriate quality should be for each of these uses. And that is where the compendium that IWRA have been working at is trying to provide an overview of the guidelines that is available. And even in Europe, only 4 out of 15 countries in Southern Europe has water reuse regulation. And similar, we are facing problems with perception among end users about the use of reused water, whether it's safe, whether it can be used for the different purposes. So in conclusion, there is a significant potential to meet water demand from different end users by different qualities of water. But there need to be a political will to do it and pay the cost. There is critical to engage stakeholders in accepting the use of reused water, and smart water management technologies and processes can play a significant role in allowing this. And IWRA have produced a separate report on smart water management technologies that have been released just recently. And it is important that we get the policy science, policy interface to work in this space to ensure that science develop the right technologies to facilitate the use of the different water qualities for different users, and science have to inform policy about what is policy. So it is not a simple issue, but the ability to fully use the different water qualities that we have at our disposal to meet new demand is a significant way in which we can possibly meet future demand. Thank you, Scott. How do I get back?
No, thank you. That was really good. I appreciate that. That gave us a really good overview of the subject, I think, and sorry, I just clicked the wrong button there. It gave us a good overview of the subject, and I think a really good intro into what we'll be talking about here today. And, you know, one of the things I noticed was, you know, I think a lot of us work in the water field, a lot of people who are tuning in are well aware that agriculture is one of the largest, predominantly enormously the largest user of water. But when you come to questions about public policy, linking this to regulation, these kind of things are something that a lot of politicians just don't, and the public just are totally is not aware of. You know, the focus is all about drinking water. And when people think about drinking water, they think about, you know, how clean they want their water, you know, at the highest level. And these kind of considerations just haven't really fully penetrated into the policy sphere and the policy discussion. So I think that was a really good introduction, and I really appreciate you being able to kind of frame that out for us. Our next presentation comes from Heather Bond. Heather, I'm gonna.
Okay, great.
Get you out of there.
Full screen. All right. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, looks great.
Wonderful. Okay, so my name is Heather Bond, and it's actually a nice transition that Henning presented right before me. I've been working very closely with Henning as we are both part of the International Water Resources Association, and we're both working on the water quality project there. I've been the project officer on some of the activities that we've been running, and so I'm going to give an overview of those activities today, and then ending with the compendium report, which Henning alluded to at the end of his presentation. So as you're all aware and was just presented, one of the first things that happened this year with IWRA in terms of the water quality project was releasing the special issue on wicked problems of water quality governance. And the other authors are here with me today to present on their articles through that. And that's kind of been a theme throughout the year for IWRA. It developed into an online discussion board, which we called the IWRA Question of the Year. And the question around this was, what wicked problems do water quality managers face over the next 20 years? And this gave the opportunity to members and the public to put their ideas into this discussion area, and it allowed some debate on the subject, some different experiences and perspectives, and idea generation spreading. So we had 27 replies on this discussion board, with some ideas such as micropollutants, contaminants of emergent concern as one major problem for management, transboundary pollution, poor management in general of water quality, high water treatment costs. So this brought up a lot of good points for us to consider in the other work that we're doing. So another aspect of what IWRA has been doing on the water quality topic is in event coordination. And this has been going on for quite a few years. I'll just quickly run through some of the recent events that we've been involved in. So in 2015, at the 7th World Water Forum, which was held in Korea, IWRA acted as a coordinator and thematic champion for the theme of ensuring water quality from ridge to reef. Jumping down to 2018, that was continued at the 8th World Water Forum, so that was just this past March in Brasilia, where we were the topic lead for ensuring water quality from ridge to reef. At the 16th World Water Congress that happened last year in 2017 in Mexico, IWRA was a Congress organizer, and we had 6 sessions under this theme, 2 of which were special sessions, and we had 41 research papers on the topic of water quality, wastewater, and reuse. And then just very recently, last month in Korea, there was held the Korea International Water Week, and IWRA was a session organizer for a workshop there. And this was based on the Water International special issue, as well as the question that we posed on the discussion board. So we've been doing a lot of event coordination, and events such as this webinar as well fall into different ways for us to spread messages on this topic. One further activity that IWRA has been engaged in over the past year is a water quality task force. So this happened at the end of 2017. We put out an open call to all our IWRA members to join the task force. And after that call, we had a number of applications, and 14 experts were selected by the IWRA selection committee. And it began running in December of 2017. So these 14 panelists are diverse in discipline, from lawyers to technical consultants, researchers, local policymakers, and they're also diverse in their global reach. And we have representatives from North and South Americas, from Europe, Africa, and Asia. And all of them are considered experts in some regard in water quality. And what their role is to advise on some of these tasks that I've just described. And the major project work they've been doing in the last year was helping with our compendium report, which I'll get to right after this. And there are a number of benefits I've just outlined here, both for the projects we're working on to have input from a diversity of voices and expert opinions, but it also helps to cultivate connections between professionals in the field of water quality, and it's bridging local quality issues, which some of them are bringing, into more of an international space. So it's been a really great opportunity for everyone to collaborate. And this brings me into the major work that IWRA has been working on for water quality, and myself as well. And this is a report that's entitled Developing a Global Compendium on Water Quality Guidelines. So this is a legacy report from IWRA. It's been worked on by several staff over about the past 5 years. And we're happy to be publishing it very shortly in December 2018, we expect, so in just over a month. The contributors to this, so we've been the authors, IWRA, but we've also had the World Water Council and ONIMA, the French National Office of Water and Aquatic Environments, that have been supporting the report and its development. And just to further explain what exactly it is, it uses that word compendium, and we're using this as this term to mean a concise compilation of a body of knowledge. And the report itself is not the compendium, because it's more of a compendium is more of a broad thing. So we're doing an example of what a full compendium, comprehensive, could include. So the structure and the content that would likely go into that, demonstrating how it could be put together. And this is also, it's really great to come off of Henning's presentation, because he was speaking on using different qualities for different water uses and the benefits that that could have. And he also cited some of the challenges in doing this. So in the perception problems and risk and uncertainty he mentioned, and a lack of guidance for water reuse. And as of 2018, there's no complete global overview of water quality guidelines from a user perspective to provide easy access and interpretation of the available resources. So that's where this report kind of comes in, and it introduces the structure for a compendium, including a brief analysis and an overview of what guidelines are out there for various uses, in order to give an overview of the guidelines, and also to encourage water reuse and other practices. And one more thing, the other interesting thing about this report is that often guidelines are set from a policymaker perspective, but we really wanted this to be from a user's perspective. So for, say, someone working in a specific industry or in agriculture, they're using that water, and we want to kind of highlight the guidelines that would be applicable to them. So this is an overview of the structure of the report. So the three bubbles in the middle, these are the content and outputs of the report, will be oriented around these three overlapping domains. So water use, the one on the left there. There's 5 water uses that we're specifically examining in this report, and they're represented by those 5 icons. So starting on the top right, and I'll move counterclockwise. The shower represents domestic water uses. Then we also have agricultural, we have industry, energy, and ecosystems. So there's a chapter dedicated to a small list of guidelines we've found according to those uses. So the water input to agriculture or to energy sectors. On the right, we're also structuring the report based on geographical scale. So we're taking a look at guidelines for those water uses at the international, regional, and national scales. So trying to get a full range of what's out there. And then finally, we're looking at all of this with a multidisciplinary perspective. And the key disciplines that we're looking at are legal, economic, institutional, environmental, social, and technical. So so that's kind of the structure of it. We're compiling guidelines on 4 water uses at various scales, and we're looking at them with different perspectives to see how they could be improved and what's missing in these sectors and guidelines right now. And the framework actions for this is to present water quality considerations and challenges in the context of the 5 defined uses, and also to identify and categorize existing water quality guidelines related to their use at various scales through case studies. So I'm going to give one example of one of the uses and how we've structured this within the report. And the one I've chosen here is agricultural water quality guidelines. So this is one chapter. And the rest of the water uses have a similar structure to them. So we start each one with giving a context to this sector. And Henning also spoke a little bit about agriculture, and this is a pretty important one because, as Henning described, it has a lot of potential to use recycled water. And it also requires, or it has about 70% of the global water withdrawals associated with agricultural practices. So it's a huge water user, and we hope to promote different forms of water use within this. So some context elements to agriculture that we examine are the interaction of water quality and agriculture. We also talk about wastewater and marginal water quality that's currently being used in agriculture. We consider common problems that face water within the agricultural setting. So salinization and toxic heavy metals are a couple of those. And then we also look at the applications of water in agriculture associated with quality requirements. So crop irrigation and livestock watering are the two focal points there. So after we've given some context, we examine a certain number of guidelines, which we consider the case studies, and we do a brief analysis of this, followed with a discussion on the sector's water quality guidance. So I'll give a very brief overview of what we've done for agriculture as an example. So here's the list that we've compiled as case study guidelines within the agricultural sector. And you can see the scale on the left-hand side. The top 4 are on an international level. We weren't able to find any regional guidelines within this sector, but we do have 3 example national ones. So some findings was that a large component of the water quality guidelines in the report did focus on recycled wastewater and encourage the use of this water in agriculture, making use of water that otherwise would not be utilized directly. But a limitation of most of these guidelines was that they didn't address certain emerging issues, such as contaminants of emerging concern, pharmaceuticals, and personal care products. So that's something that needs to be addressed in future guidelines in the sector. We also found that most of the guidance was directed at developed countries, while more water quality guidelines should be created in developing countries for agricultural use. And that's because a lot of untreated wastewater is commonly used in these settings, and there could be health implications by not having proper guidance or regulations there. And then another final finding in this sector was that on a national level, water quality guidelines were relatively limited. We've included 3 there, but there weren't many more other than that we could find. So perhaps this reflects the widespread use of potable water in more developed countries, and in developing countries, a general lack or oversight regarding water use. So the final thing I'll talk about with this report is that another main objective of it was to provide the proposed framework and initial content to supply a more complete compendium on global water quality guidelines according to water use. And it's, as we want to create a comprehensive compendium, we would also include regulations, so not just guidelines in that full one. We propose that this information be stored and available on an online website in a format that's user-friendly, easily accessible, and easily updated as new guidelines emerge. And that's because information platforms, such as the proposed one online, they ultimately contribute to increased access and sharing of data and tools, which is something that we need to fulfill some of the sustainable development goals. And furthermore, I noted that regulations should also be included, but we also want to acknowledge that there are more water uses than the 5 that are described in the report, such as municipal watering of parks, private watering of golf courses, transportation, recreational uses. So all of these should be included in such a comprehensive compendium. So just to finish, and to finish up also on Henning's point, that we do believe that directing water more appropriately across all sectors based on their water quality needs could ultimately improve water use efficiencies, health outcomes, decision-making, and management processes. And furthermore, it could help relieve stress on water-scarce resources and ensure adequate water quality inputs to various applications. And to finish, the full document that I've been describing, the Developing a Global Compendium on Water Quality Guidelines, and the related materials associated with it will be available on our website. I've given it there by the end of the year. Thank you very much.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for that presentation. And it's really wonderful to see the compendium having moved along so long after such a time. It's been around so long that I was in the office when the office wasn't even in Paris when we started this process. Henning was, I remember first time I met Henning was through this compendium. So it's been quite some time. But it's good to see things have really moved along. And you've done such a really great job with it. Just that level of information, that detail. That's really great. So that's good job. We're going to hear from our next speaker, Birgitta Lymer. Now, I know she's unable to get her camera working, but we should see her presentation. There we go. You need to unmute your microphone there.
I'm unmuted. There? Excellent. Do you see it well?
Yes,
yes,
looks
so,
good.
So as Scott mentioned, you won't be able to see me. So if you want to see what I'm looking at, then you'll have to Google me, I guess. Unfortunately, I couldn't get my camera working. My name is Birgitta Liss Lymer. As Scott mentioned, I will present a paper that we contributed to this special issue together with my colleagues, Josh and Torkil Clausen. And here we have been looking at water quality from maybe the broader perspective, primarily analyzing how does water quality figure in the Sustainable Development Goals, using that as a basis of analysis of a bit of some of the challenges and opportunities when it comes to water quality management, and really looking at water quality from source to sea. There are, like, you could call it like two aspects of water quality: the water quality for different human uses, so to say, but then there's also the aspect of water quality for the environment. And I suppose the focus, looking at the source to sea perspective, perhaps the focus is a little bit more on the latter. There. And then the question arrives, like, why do we want to look at water quality from a source to sea perspective? I use this slide a lot as my kind of wake up slide sometimes, because we have this situation with quite severe deterioration of our environmental condition in rivers, in aquifers, wetlands, deltas, coasts, and marine areas. And also, as Henning mentioned, in most of our world, our water systems are exposed to very high pressures in terms of over exploitation, etc. So we are facing a situation with more increasing competition when it comes to our water resources, but also quite deteriorating water qualities in a general sense, and quite severe environmental degradation as a result as well. Many of the pressures on our water systems come from activities that take place upstream in areas that do not necessarily experience all of the negative impacts of those activities. And basically, that's a bit of the problem formulation going into the rationale for why you need to look at this from a source to sea perspective. Because it is quite challenging to manage these connections between upstream pressures and downstream impacts. When it comes to water quality, we know that water quality deterioration of larger end recipients, like coastal and marine waters, for example, is often the result of pollution loads from quite large geographical areas. And to be able to resolve or reduce those pollution loads, measures in many different sectors are required, perhaps in several countries. In such cases, water quality management is made quite cumbersome by having to deal with many different sources of pollution that may have little individual but large cumulative impacts. And we also know that the trend now, when it comes to the use of fertilizers, pesticides, plastics, several other potential pollutants, are actually pointing straight upwards. We are still struggling to control diffuse sources of pollution. We've been talking about the opportunities to use different types of water of different types of quality for agricultural uses. And Heather was mentioning how the water quality guidelines in relation to agriculture, but then there's also the aspect of agriculture as a major contributor to water quality deterioration downstream. And that is an issue that we're still struggling with in most parts of the world. And in addition, we know wastewater treatment is still limited. Like 70% of our wastewater globally goes untreated into the nature. So basically, we'll need to do better somehow. How to manage resources sustainably and how to manage water quality all the way from the source to the sea. At the same time, when it comes to the water world, so to say, is more or less completely divided into fresh and salty, where the salty part is very aware of the impacts of upstream activities, but has very little influence over them. And upstream, in the water community, for example, the coast and sea can feel very far away sometimes, while there is perhaps more focus issues related to water allocation, providing water services, issues related to water scarcity, and how we just are able to secure water for the different uses. And now, of course, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, really providing a framework, pointing us in a direction of where we want to go for the future. It is really an integrated, supposed to be a very integrated and indivisible agenda, balancing these social, economic, environmental dimensions of sustainable development. It's very ambitious. And we can see somehow this fresh and salty division also here, with SDG 6 focusing on the clean water and sanitation, SDG 14 concerns sustainable use and protection of marine resources, SDG 2 dealing with sustainable agriculture, etc. It's a bit of division, but at the same time, the Sustainable Development Goals also offer the first globally agreed targets on improved fresh and marine water quality for all countries that we can work towards together. As I was touching upon before, we know one important aspect of these SDGs concern the aim to somehow balance or even decouple economic growth from environmental degradation. And to do that, we need to understand these system linkages better. The target to reduce marine pollution is, of course, dependent upon sustainable agriculture, wastewater treatment, sustainable cities, sustainable consumption and production, etc. And countries will need to be able to address such linkages to achieve the SDGs overall. Because we know that water connects our ecosystems from source to sea, flows of water, of sediment, also these pollutants, flows of fish, for example, migratory fish species, and even materials connect land and water to deltas, coasts, and oceans. If you change some of these flows somewhere in the system, it will have impacts further down, whether it's in relation to pollutants or water flows. But how do these kind of source to sea linkages figure across the overall SDG agenda? Well, implicitly we can kind of say they're all over. The importance of water as a resource, of water quality, of water-related ecosystems are explicitly referred to throughout the SDG agenda. UN Water did this mapping of the interlinkages between the water targets and the other SDGs in 2017, I think, or 16. And in relation to water quality, that mapping identified potential synergies or conflicts with practically all the other sustainable development goals. And of course, potential conflicts with water quality were primarily identified in relation to the targets to increase production and increase economic growth. That's not very surprising. But of course, those conflicts are then hoped to be mitigated by investing in sustainable production, sustainable being the key word here. But what do we mean by sustainable? Looking at how a target is defined by a sustainable development goal target is defined by its indicators. In this study, we were really drilling down to how the indicators were formulated. The sustainability of production is measured against other parameters, not necessarily water quality, or not water quality at all in most cases. There is quite limited focus on water pollution. When it comes to sustainable agriculture, for example, there is no reference whatsoever to agriculture as a source of water pollution. When it comes to sustainability of industries, that one is measured primarily against carbon dioxide emissions, but not water pollution either. So it's important not to lose sight of the bigger picture and the vision of the Sustainable Development Goals as part of its implementation. There is always a risk that the indicators, for the sake of practicality, become the target that they are intended to measure progress on. But the indicators are quite sector specific, and they themselves will not provide the framework that is needed for integration between all these different objectives among the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs, they provide a very good framework, but there will be a lot of effort needed to ensure these linkages are captured, and that the need for investments to address links between, for example, then agriculture, water quality, and marine pollution are not neglected. And this challenge is not unique to SDG implementation by any means. This is the type of coordination and prioritization challenges that countries are dealing with constantly. Since there are few references to minimized water pollution and how sustainable production is defined, and since the SDG targets and indicators lack provisions to measure the release of pollutants from different sources, the conclusion is basically that the SDGs in themselves do not really provide a very strong framework for such intersectoral accountability. That has to happen kind of outside the SDG tracking mechanisms. The SDG indicators are very much designed to measure the final result, not really to provide the tools for us how to get there. But hopefully, they can provide more incentive to strengthen governance, collaboration, monitoring, etc. So to enable countries to make more informed trade-offs between different sectors and stakeholders, both upstream and downstream. Because the SDGs in themselves, they don't change the administrative institutional situation most countries are facing. Looking at the entire source to sea continuum, or from upstream to downstream, including cities, agricultural areas, rivers, lakes, and deltas, coastal and marine areas. Management frameworks are often weak or overlapping. There's a mishmash of different plans and strategies, land use, urban marine spatial plans, IWRA, ICM plans. There are different borders between municipalities and river basin, etc. And even if there's been a lot of progress when it comes to integrated management over the past decades, it is very challenging to consider how different development activities affect the flows that connect the larger system, and to set objectives in one segment that are balanced against potential downstream impacts. To achieve these sustainable development goals, we need to capture the opportunities available to balance economic growth with sustainability and avoid risking economic opportunities downstream by a failure to manage our activities upstream and their impacts. I have to do a lot of clicking, sorry. But to do that, we need to understand the system we're in, how pressures are transmitted via flow alterations, and the impacts. We need knowledge on how the existing governance system can be strengthened to enable such informed trade-offs. And a key concern in all of the source to sea initiatives that we have reviewed as part of our work concerns the engagement of key stakeholders, like the engagement of upstream countries, of municipalities, of sectors like agriculture and industry, to be able to determine common objective for the system as a whole. To do that would represent quite an achievement and a step towards aligning different sectoral plans and policies to meet common goals and targets. And basically this is part of the reason why the action platform for source to sea management was established now like 3-4 years ago. This is a collection of a number of organizations that are working actively to address these issues, recognizing the gap when it comes to priority setting in recognizing these linkages and trying to address them, and also the challenges in terms of governance and management coordination, etc. We are working together to share experiences, to develop more knowledge and support innovative management from source to sea. IWRA is also a member of the platform, and we have contributed to many of the events and the work that Heather presented in the previous presentation. So if you want more information on the source to sea platform or our work, don't hesitate to contact us. And with this, I would also like to thank some of the writing teams of some of the papers that we have produced recently. Thank you.
No, thank you. That was really great. We appreciate that presentation, and I think that it highlighted a much overlooked aspect of all of this, which is how to connect these really widely geographically located areas. It could be thousands of miles apart, in terms of the marine ecosystems and the freshwater ecosystems. But how do you connect those, and how do you communicate that across transboundary issues, across different stakeholders? So I think that was really good. And I know you guys have been working on that project for quite a number of years now. So congratulations on making quite a lot of progress there as well. Our next presentation is Dr. Anna Robak. And just to remind everyone that we're trying to keep these to 10 minutes long, so we have enough time for some speaker questions at the end. And to anyone in the audience who's interested and wants to get a question in now, you see the question control panel is about halfway down on your GoToWebinar box, control panel box there. Just click it, type the question, and I'll see it, and then we can direct it to our panel at the end of the presentation. So with that, Dr. Robak.
Thanks, Scott. Just let me make sure I get the right screen here. And let me know when you can see that.
It looks great.
Okay, fantastic. So folks have been talking about difficult tensions in water quality and in the social side of it. And what Henning and I did in our research initially was look to understand what is the value of a higher or lower level of service in terms of your drinking water. And when we started out, we used two methods. One was people's willingness to pay for a higher or lower quality, and the other one was people's revealed preferences. So what were they actually doing? What were their averting behaviors? And when I talk about water service quality, it is the entire range of the quality of the water itself, through to the pressure of the water, through to the frequency of restrictions. The whole gamut for people that are interested in drinking water understand that that's quite a range of things to look at. So when we did our research, we discovered quite surprisingly that not only, and this was in a developed country context, this was in New Zealand, we discovered that not only were people actually quite affected in terms of their averting behaviors in a developed country context when they didn't love the quality of their water service. And the other thing we discovered was that lower income families were even more affected. And that wasn't because they had a worse quality of water service. It was actually because they made different decisions on how to avert or how to behave than higher income households did. So that was quite surprising for us. And I'll take you through that. I'll talk about the aim of the research, which I've kind of touched on already. There were some previous studies there's a lot of previous studies in averting behaviors in water. I'll touch on those very briefly. And then the method that we used, as I mentioned, was averting behaviors, take you through our findings, our conclusions, and then our recommendations in terms of what this could mean for policy and what it could mean for water suppliers in particular, and how they could think a little bit differently about delivering their services. So the motivation for this research was that there's pressure worldwide from regulators and consumers to provide more affordable water services. It is getting more expensive because regulations are getting more stringent. Our infrastructure is aging. there's all kinds of reasons that the cost of supplying water is increasing. And so our question was, what are the implications of reducing that level of service to meet people's cost expectations? Because that seems to be the only balance, or one of the few ways of balancing. And so the aim of our research was understand how much were people averting, and how were they averting when they didn't love the quality of their water service. And the reason it says poor water service quality here, but in actual fact, people avert even when the service is not a poor quality. In fact, even when it's not, as soon as it becomes not excellent, they start averting. So really quickly, the reason, since the motivation was about affordable water, the question is, what is it? Well, typically it's talked about as the water bills as a percentage of income. So the higher your water bill or the lower your income, the less affordable your water is. But we looked at it a little bit differently. So our question was, how much were New Zealanders averting? And if they were averting a lot, then that means that changes the affordability of water. So we looked at it this way. You can see that I've added a little filter there, but the filter could be any kind of equipment or any kind of behavior that people are adding. So in this case, people's water bills plus their averting behavior is what we're saying is the definition of affordability as a percentage of income. So with that in mind, we looked at different studies, averting behavior studies across the world. The ones in developed countries tended to be more focused on either events, so contamination events where people's water had been contaminated, or people's interest in drinking bottled water. Whereas in the developing countries, there were a little bit more cases where it was chronic water quality issues, and in only one instance did we find a little bit more research into other aspects, other attributes of a water service. So the New Zealand study, you can see in the bottom right corner, poor New Zealand often gets missed off maps, so I've made sure it's here. The bottom right corner is our highlighted study. And the research that we did, we used revealed preference. We asked people directly, what are you doing in terms of averting or behaving in order to improve the quality of your service within your home? And we used a dynamic online survey. And the reason that's important is because it allowed us, as soon as people said what they did, we could ask them why they did that. So every single piece of equipment or every single behavior they did, we could ask them directly why they did that. And so that gave us a really rich data set. We had over 1,900 responses that were quite representative water consumers across New Zealand. What we did then, once we found out how much averting behavior people were doing, was we estimated the cost of those averting behaviors. So using basic costs like what is the cost of a filter and how much would it cost to run a filter or UV system throughout a year. So some pretty basic estimates, and you can see more detail about how we made those estimates in the paper. So averting behaviors in New Zealand surprised us. You can see on the very bottom there that it says total is 48%. That means 48% of respondents to this survey said that they undertook some sort of averting behavior. And you can see if you work your way from the left, the types of averting behaviors they did, filtering the water was the most prominent. So 23% of New Zealanders filter their water. 10% of them boil their water. And you can see there's a fair percentage that store, source, and improve the pressure of their water in some way. So that did surprise us because we thought in a developed country context, people should generally be happy with the quality and certainly not be doing this level of averting behavior. But the next thing we wondered was, did these averting behaviors change when the quality of the service changes? So if the quality of your service is better, do you do less of an averting behavior? And we found that that was the case. And I'm showing here just a handful of the reasons that people said, or that their perception about their quality of their service. And these are all related to water quality. And the reason we've chosen the ones related to water quality is that these were the only ones that were statistically significant. So you can see the top attribute is the taste, smell, and appearance, or the aesthetics. And you can see here that terrible water, 38% of people treat it in some way. But as you move through to excellent, only 10% of people are likely to treat it when they find their water excellent. Now, the question of why they're still treating it if they find it excellent is something else. But what we did find, and you can see in all of these attributes, that even when people are completely satisfied or say they're completely satisfied with a particular attribute, they still might use some sort of an averting behavior. So you can see the next one down is about protection from microorganisms. About 8% of people will treat their water when they are somewhat or when they feel somewhat or mostly protected, compared to completely protected, which is at 4%. Protection from chemicals, again, you can see that when people feel not at all protected, there's quite a few of them are really likely to treat their water, etc. So the overall finding here, of course, is that the better the water quality, the less people are likely to avert. And the reason that that's important is that it means if a water supplier supplies a better quality of service, they can expect less of this averting behavior and they can expect less economic burden. So what I've shown here, your eyes are sort of going to cross over the numbers here. It shows the expenditure levels at different water qualities or different service quality levels. The reason I've shown it is only to show that there's no pattern, which is really important, because what it means is as soon as someone decides to undertake an averting behavior, there's actually no statistical difference in how much they'll spend. And the reason is that if you decide to filter your water, for example, then you just buy that filter, and it doesn't matter how terrible your water is. You're not going to buy more modules for that filter. That filter basically does its job. So the next question is, well, how much are people spending, whether it's boiling or filtering or storing their water? And this again kind of points to why we focused on the water quality issue, because people spend such a large chunk of their averting behaviors, of their time, and of their money on boiling and filtering their water. And you can see that boiling and filtering, boiling is a lot more expensive than filtering. And the reason for that has to do with people's value of time. And so what we found was that when we compared lower and higher income households, the lower income households were much more likely to boil their water. So you can see that at $74 per year amortized, it's a lot more expensive to boil than to filter your water. And a few reasons we thought this might be happening is because either lower income households simply can't afford the upfront costs of a filter, or they don't understand the whole of life costs of the boiling versus the filter option. Another possibility, of course, is that they're simply not valuing their time because they're willing to invest that time into boiling their water. And so overall, you can see on the left-hand side here that higher income households that undertake averting behaviors, and it's mostly about improving the taste and odor, they're spending between $135 and $170 an hour. Whereas lower income households, sorry, not per year, not per hour, whereas lower income households are spending between $190 and $220. So there's a huge difference there, and you can see there's an obvious burden on lower income households who experience the same quality of service, or they're stating that it feels the same to them. And so findings overall, just to summarize everything, half of water customers in New Zealand, a developed country, are motivated to undertake averting behaviors. So that is a huge economic burden. That's $184 per household on average in New Zealand per year. The main reasons they're averting are for aesthetics, microbes, chemicals, and hardness. And again, this is a country that has good drinking water quality standards, and for the most part, their water supplies are following them. So there's the economic burden. We also found that as service quality degrades, more households will act But if you're already averting, you're not going to invest more. So the benefits aren't going to be that you save a household that's already averting from spending more money, but that you save more households from acting in the first place. We found that especially when the taste of water is poor, lower income households are more likely than higher income households to act, and also they're going to invest more of their time. So there's a greater burden there. And finally, even when consumers perceive service quality as excellent, they will still undertake averting behaviors. And so really quickly, averting behaviors make up a significant portion of household water service costs. Taste and odor motivate the largest investments, and even an excellent service quality won't eliminate all behaviors. So I mentioned these two definitions, and that's one of our recommendations is to be very cognizant of that definition of affordability. If you're a water supplier, be aware of the impacts of your level of service on your customers, because you might not see it, but they might be doing it. And also that taste and odor are so important, such important motivators, that if you're making any improvements to your water, you'd better make sure that you're looking at those too, because if you don't, people might still be acting or averting, even if the quality is safe. And finally, because we don't know the reason yet that lower income households are averting more, it's worth having a look at what those driving reasons are, and it might mean that they need some education, some awareness, or even some subsidies to help them afford the whole of life costs. So the final takeaway is that the economic burden of water service quality in New Zealand is significant, despite having a very good quality. And our question is if this burden could be more efficiently mitigated through centralized improvements, or whether households should continue to customize this level of service themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I really appreciate it. I have to compliment you on the really great survey design and the really great methods that you use there to be able to collect that data. I think that, you know, it's easy to talk about ideas or anything, but be able to dig in and pull out some information from that data set that you collected, that's really valuable and a real great piece there to provide. And like you said, there's so much interesting information that I think that people maybe wouldn't have thought about from New Zealand, like you said, a developed country and all that. There's a lot more questions that it raised about, you know, how to move forward, and I think that's really valuable and a good contribution. Our final presentation is coming from Yuliya.
Yeah,
here. And I'm going to be presenting, advancing your slides, correct? So just go ahead and tell me when to advance to the next slide. And let me get this.
Okay.
Hopefully this works.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
please.
Excellent. Nope. There we go. Can we see myself yet?
I can see. Yes. So it's okay. Yeah. I can start.
Yes. Give me 1 second. I just want to make.
Oh, okay. So.
Here we go. It's just not a very good mouse.
Okay.
There we go. Everyone can see the slides well?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you so much. So my name is Yuliya. I'm from Czech Republic, and actually my main research direction is water quality and wine. And water quality is focused on emerging compounds and different type of pollutants in water. But being scientists, we are faced with one interesting issue: water legislation. Actually, please, you can go to the next slide. So. And we found, going deeper to water chemistry, we found actually what water quality and water pollution is very often related to water legislation. And in some countries, the meaning of pollution can be totally different. So in our case here, I present our research with two of my colleagues. but focus on 3 countries in Europe and Georgia in Asian part. And these 3 countries, it's about 50 million of people. It's post-Soviet countries. They are non-EU members, but they signed association with European Union. Those 3 countries, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, they have legislation heritage from Soviet period. And unfortunately, at present time, water quality and quantity are considered as poor. One of the reasons is weak water management and pollution control. Next slide, please. So, general overview of water legislation. So, from Soviet period, it was actually during the Soviet Union time, the water legislation came in force in the 60s of the last century. So it's quite a long time. And after independent states, most of the countries, after what non-EU countries, they adapt the Soviet legislation even without change. Most of them, it was just without change because it was too expensive to change legislation and especially water quality standards. So this legislation includes only general provisions without any direct measurements or implementation, but they became a base for governmental regulation, standards, building codes, norms, and other regulatory documents. Interesting, what payment for water extraction and discharge is a tax form in those countries. Next slide, please. Water governments. Unfortunately, this is a huge problem in those countries, in post-Soviet countries with non-EU, because it's provided by state authorities, environmental ministries, and agencies. And this is so multiple institutions. It's also kind of heritage from Soviet Union, but very difficult to reconstruct. And they have even some overlapping responsibilities. You cannot get any comprehensive database on water quality, and there is no linkage between institutions. So if you would like to know water quality in your river next to your house, it's almost impossible to get this information. Unfortunately, this fragmentation and overlapping responsibilities, they reduce efficiency of water management and regulation in countries. The next slide, please. So another important value is property right to water resources. It's actually the key queries what identify direction of water management. In all 3 countries, it's a public good, but individuals or legal entities, they have right to use it in a framework of legislation. But it's very also different. For example, in Ukraine, water bodies can be rented, for example, but land cannot be. So if you can rent or can be owner of water bodies, you can own only of water, but not land under the water. And it's linked a lot of disputes. In Moldova, for example, you can water can be also a private and public ownership, but in Georgia, it's only public ownership. So sometimes the property rights very contradicting across different type of legislative acts, for example, between land acts and water acts. And it's lead to a lot of conflict and dispute between different type of users. Next slide, please. Water quality and quantity standards. Actually, this is what identify pollution status. If it's water polluted or not polluted, it's according to the quality standards. There is multiple quality standards, what also became kind of heritage from Soviet time. And some of the parameters, they not exist anymore, for example, because of no production of it, but they still included in the legislation. But unfortunately, there is only 80 parameters regularly measured, monitored, because there is a lack of financing in those countries. So legislation, water quality standards, they are much more huge database compared to European Union, for example, but they're not monitored because it's just impossible to do that. And sometimes it's very interesting in moment. Water quality standards, they're too strict. They're even more strict than some European Union standards. But water users, because it's so expensive to build new water treatment facilities, wastewater treatment facilities, and to do some investments or renovations, they just prefer to pay taxes. It will be elevated taxes for pollution, but not to do some improvements. The next slide, please. Yeah, but in 2014, all those three post-Soviet countries, they signed agreement with European Union, what they will adapt European Union legislation. But it's not so easy, and it's still a very complicated task, because the main discrepancy, terminology is totally different. What you meaning of pollution or pollutants, it's not the same between European Water Framework Directive and between water acts in Ukraine or Moldova or Georgia. So it's totally different understanding of water quality, pollution, pollutant. And in post-Soviet legislation, there is no stakeholders involvement. The old legislation is only based on users' needs, and main users, it's industry, irrigation and drinking supply for population buffering, for example. And also fishing. So another interesting point, what water quality monitoring and control very different in terms of organization, method, and measured parameters. For example, if you have Danube transboundary river measuring trace metals from Ukrainian side and from European Union side, it will be totally different databases, totally different parameters. Next slide, please. So this is what I already mentioned. There is some example what pollution, pollutant, and water quality, how it can be different between different legislation. And actually, this is a main base and linkage for water quality management, water quality control, what should be taken into account always. Even for guidelining or something, you should always consider what terminology is not similar, and this is the base of all other further steps. Next slide, please. Maybe I'm so quick, but trying to. So, like a summary. For some post-Soviet countries, like Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, they're important because they signed association with European Union. They're transboundary, like Moldova and Ukraine, with European Union, and their water legislation is under transformation from Soviet to European standards. But it still requires significant change in terminology, structure, content of water laws. Main shortcoming, because this is very fragmented, all water management, water governments, and different poorly defined responsibilities between different institutions. There is a discrepancy on property rights, what links to the some dispute between various water users, and very outdated water quality standards. And the last slide, please. So as kind of conclusion, I would like to emphasize, so before establishing water quality guidelines, any type of guidelines, legislation, we should always think about our neighbors. Here on our paper recently published about how, like Ukraine, transboundary country with European Union, what shares the same hydrological borders, have the same watersheds with European Union, but totally different legislation, how they contribute to different emerging compounds, trace metals to European Union. Ukraine is not polluting because it's according to legislation of Ukraine, but it's not according to the legislation of European Union. It should be taken into account for Water Framework Directive because it's not considered in transboundary. You cannot fulfill the requirements of Water Framework Directive if you have neighbors what have totally different standards. Thank you so much. This is fine.
No, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. And just give me 1 second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And that was an excellent presentation. And I think it touched, for me at least, on a lot of some of the same issues that we heard from Dr. Lymer about, you know, kind of source to sea and the broader impacts that, you know, governance needs to geographically cover between different pollution sources. So I thought that was an excellent presentation. I appreciate that. We are going to briefly go to questions if we have some time here. I'm going to try to wrap this up here in the next 10 minutes, but let's see how many questions we can get in. First question comes from, and please, anyone, just feel free, you can unmute yourself there and jump in on the question. Dr. Rashid Ismanov from Azerbaijan asks, to apply basin principles, how would you do that to apply basin-wide water management principles if the country is arid, such as it is in Azerbaijan. How can you bring those two together to address these kind of questions?
Could you repeat the question, Scott?
Possibly. I may have deleted it. Yes, I have deleted it. The question is, how can you apply basin-wide water management principles in cases where a country is not does not have significant precipitation, is in fact very arid, and how can you use these basin-wide principles to solve, I guess, some of the water problems that you've addressed, y'all have addressed?
I can try to answer it because I know a little bit situation with.
There we go, expert.
So I'm not expert in this region and area, but as I know, Azerbaijan also faced this Soviet practice of reallocation of water resources. So it's very difficult to define the basin, really, the basin size, shape, and everything, because most of the resources they reallocated. And worse countries, they mostly rely on groundwaters. And here there should be a little bit more focus on aquifer, but probably not on the basin approach and surface water, but on the aquifer. This is what I can just assume for this situation in Azerbaijan. It cannot be easily applicable, the situation with European Union. There is a basin, it's because it's also different heritage of water management from Soviet period.
That's a good perspective, and that's something you raised in your talk, I think, about being able to reflect not on just the water laws that they have today, but to look at a historical perspective to see how water has been managed and to see how those kind of influence the laws we currently have. And that's important as we look towards harmonization of certain laws, particularly as EU has expanded and has started to include more and more of these ex-Soviet countries. Good observation. Thank you for that response. If anyone else wants to respond, any of the other panelists want to respond to the question, or if anyone else has any other questions, please type them in here in the next few seconds in the question box. Otherwise, we will wrap up because it has now been 90 minutes, which is the allocated time for our webinar. Any last questions? Okay, well, I guess, usually I give a short opportunity for everyone to say one last little summary or including final thought there. So Professor Henning, would you like to say anything there in conclusion, just kind of wrap up?
To wrap up, I will say I can thank everybody for attending this webinar at different hours at different parts of the world. There's no doubt that managing water quality is going to be major global issues and a major challenge, not only for technologies and science, but more importantly, actually, for the social sciences to find out how do we change people's behavior in such a way that they either pollute less, or in such a way that they use less, or in such a way that they use the most appropriate water quality to meet their water needs. That is no easy task, but that we basically do not have any alternatives because there is not enough new freshwater resources to meet everybody's demand.
Thanks. Heather Bond?
My final remarks are, I'll actually answer the question that was asked because I've been thinking about it now and how to address arid regions that are water scarce. And this kind of is my message from this webinar and the work I've been doing and how important guidelines are and looking at what people are doing in other parts of the world. So other arid regions such as Israel or Australia that are managing their water scarcity quite well. So looking at best practices and sharing information on platforms such as this webinar, the special issue, and the report that IWRA is bringing out in order to help people learn about what could work, what's working in other settings and could be applied in their settings as well. So the importance of sharing information like this.
It's a good observation, sharing information, just like this webinar, like you said. Excellent. Mrs. Birgitta Lymer? Dr. Lymer?
Mrs. Lymer, I would say. Not doctor. Yeah, no, and I would just like try to highlight like the bigger picture again. I think in terms of because water quality management are many things. It's at the household level, it's municipality level, country level, individual level. But somehow we need to, as Henning was saying, it's a major global challenge, not only to meet water demands for the future, but also not to lose basically all of our biodiversity and ecosystem services in our water systems, also coastal and marine. So I think there's a need to also bring that perspective in general when talking about water quality management, and also address more specifically leakage aspects into the environment. Water quality management should increasingly also be about reducing the leakage and maybe more guidelines in relation to that, I would say. Yeah, so those were my final words in the interest of time.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. Robak?
Just to extend Henning's point about the social side and the importance of that, it's really, to me, the key is people understanding the implications of their actions, and then us understanding how to motivate them to act in a way that will be sustainable and maintain good water quality.
Excellent. And Dr. Vystavna?
Vystavna, okay. So no, I just would like to thank everyone, because for me, actually, each presentation was very interesting, and it highlights some very important and different direction on water quality. So I just would like to thank all presentation and participants and moderator. Thank you. It was very useful and very nice webinar for me, especially. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, and thank you to my whole panel, and thank you to everyone for tuning in here today. Or if you're, I guess, watching on YouTube later, then thank you for taking the time to watch us today. Just to let you know that the panel and IWRA itself, many of us are on Twitter, so go ahead and look us up and follow and engage with our social media there. Also, if these presentations have left you interested in wanting to learn more or discuss more, you can check out our LinkedIn webpage and connect with us there, and we'll be posting some discussion questions so people can kind of continue in the discussion and continue thinking about these issues and engaging on them. And finally, to remind you that this is all based on the special issue of Water International, our flagship publication, and will be provided to you, the viewer who's watching in real time, for a short period of open access. So please go ahead and download all the articles and cite them all several times, as many times as possible in your future publications. But really do engage. We appreciate that Taylor and Francis, our sponsor and our publisher, for making that available to us, and thank you for that. We hope that everyone here found the insights really helpful, really profound. It gave me a lot of material to think about in my own work and my own coming days. So I hope it's generating the creativity and some ideas for you as well. Just to remind you, everyone, again, that this webinar is brought to you by the International Water Resources Association, an over 40-year-old nonprofit, non-governmental educational organization. We focus on bridging disciplines and geographies and connecting professionals, students, individuals, corporations, institutions, everyone who's concerned with the sustainable use of the world's water resources. So if you're interested in learning more about the association or possibly becoming a member, which is a great idea, you should go to www.iwra.org. So on behalf of the whole IWRA office, thank you for tuning in and watching the webinar. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.